All right, thanks all for being my guinea pig and having a chat with me. For those of you who don't know, Ol and I are both business partners in DQventures, and so it's not quite an external interview. But Ollie has had an interesting career, including a fairly decent exit. So we're going to talk about that and some other things that have happened through Ol's career. So, Ola, I'm going to just jump straight in and I'm going to ask some general questions about you before we start talking about business and DQ and TigerSpike. So, just to give everyone a bit of background, and actually, I don't know this either, full background, where were you born?
I was born in Cape Town in South Africa, and I lived there for a couple of years. And then I actually grew up in Nairobi in Kenya. I lived in Kenya till I was 16, and then went to the UK, did my A levels in the UK, and then I went to Durham University in the north of England, and I have a degree in molecular biology and biochemistry. And then I went traveling around the world, and I got as far as Sydney, and I never left. So I stayed in Sydney, started working there. I was the sixth employee in an early internet cafe startup in '99. And then after that, worked for Australian government for a little while, and then started my first company, TigerSpike, in 2005. So that's sort of the formative early stage stuff.
So anyone who doesn't know you that's watching this, what do you do now, and what are you known for in your career? You know, how do you describe yourself when you introduce yourself to people?
Sort of TigerSpike was sort of the I guess the thing I'm most sort of known for. So in 2005, we myself, Luke, and Dean started TigerSpike. It was actually my wife's idea at the time, although we have written her out of history. So she came up with the idea for TigerSpike. It was creating ringtones. My business partner was a musician in a band, and we worked out how to plug his keyboard into a computer, and we were creating polyphonic ringtones for phones, and selling them wholesale to these platforms, which then sold them on premium rate numbers. And from that, we just learned a lot about mobiles, how they worked. We started developing video. We actually hired a couple of interns from a university doing computer science degree, and they wrote some of the early games, J2ME games on mobiles, and we were porting them to all the different handsets. I guess one of the interesting questions that I always get is what was it that triggered, when did you know you had an idea for a business? Because it's one thing to kind of do something on the side and kind of see if selling ringtones is going to be the go. But I remember speaking to a friend of mine who's an IT project manager, and I told him about this business, TigerSpike, in mobile, and he told me that there was no chance. It was never going to go anywhere. It was just such a ridiculous idea, and I should stick with the government job that I had at the time. But I remember that we'd created about 100, probably about 1,000 ringtones for the Nokia phones, and then Motorola came out with the flip phone, the Motorola Razr. I don't know if you remember. It's that sort of silver
Yeah,
one, flipped.
yeah.
Yeah, so that came out, and literally overnight, everybody had a Motorola Razr, and there was no content for them. So all these platforms couldn't sell their ringtones. It took a different format of ringtone. So all these kids who'd got these phones was a potential audience that wasn't being serviced. And the owner of the company came to us and said, right, you've got to convert all of these ringtones into this new format. And Luke said, sure, no problem. It'll cost you $16 a ringtone, and we'll have it done by the end of the week. And he gave me a call a couple of hours after that meeting and said, hey, Ol, I've got us a job. I've no idea how to do it. We've got to turn all these ringtones from with this format into this format. And I spent 10 minutes on the web, and somebody had written a batch processor, which I downloaded, and it ran through the 1,000 ringtones and turned them from one format into another. And I sent him a zip file back 15 minutes later. And I said, here you go. It took him longer to write the file names into the Excel spreadsheet than it did for me to find the conversion program and send them to him. And they paid us 16 grand. We had to wait 3 days because we said we'd do it by the end of the week, but we literally had completed the job in less than an hour. So we were on a sort of $16,000 an hour rate, and that was when I realized that technology and a little bit of knowledge allowed you to sort of do clever stuff. And you could, I mean, I'm sure he could have got one of his employees to have a look for it, but because we had a business and we were known as the people who did stuff in mobile and did stuff with content, he came to us and asked us to fill a need, which we did technically and met that, and he uploaded them. And I'm sure he made lots more money than the amount he paid us. But that for me was that the kind of the light bulb moment where we'd got an idea, we had something out in the market, and then suddenly we realized we were able to charge for it and make significant amounts of money from it. And so from then on, it was all about how do we replicate that? How do we continue to sort of kind of do more, increase, be more innovative, and do more with technology, and sell that to partner companies.
Wow, cool. Actually, I know a guy who he developed the website for the movie The Passion of the Christ, and he had a similar experience where he suddenly realized how many people were going to come to this website, and he knew that he was going to crash. So he shopped around, and he was looking in source code of other sites for other big movies, and he basically found this hosting provider who are the only people on the planet who were able to cope with this much traffic back in the day. This was early 2000s, and he phoned them, and they said, and he said what he was doing, and they said, we wondered when you were going to call, because they were just expecting, because it had so much hype.
Waiting.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they told him how much it was going to cost for the extra per 1,000 visitors simultaneously. So he just took that price, added 20%, gave it to Icon Studios, whoever Mel Gibson Studios were, and then it just exploded. And that 20% became thousands of pounds, or hundreds of thousands of pounds. It basically set this guy up for life. And he was
Amazing.
just like, wow, that was, I didn't actually do anything.
It's so simple. That's it. And I mean, yeah, it's exactly right. There's a really good story about the guy who his super yacht kind of comes to a grinding halt, and the engine doesn't work. It's terrible. And he says, I've got to get off this island. And he calls the engineer, and he's like, I'll pay you 20 grand. You've got to fix it. And the engineer says, no problem. And he walks in, and he like flicks a switch and then walks back out. And the guy said, but I can't pay you 20 grand. You've done 5 minutes work. And he says, well, nobody else could have fixed it, and it's taken me 20 years experience to know where to go to flick that, to readjust that, and that's what you're paying the 20 grand for. You're not paying the 20 grand for the time it's taken me to do it. And I think that's the thing with business. It's about using your experience and your knowledge and your understanding to do something just that little bit differently, a little bit smarter, a little bit slightly cleverer than something else, or just in a different way, because people get so ingrained in the way things are done. Everything sort of stays the same in businesses, and the world is changing so rapidly. So many businesses spring up because things change, but businesses haven't. So someone can see an idea or use a new technology or apply something in a different way, and that's why I think there's just constant opportunity. There's so many opportunities in any industry, anywhere, to create new ways of doing things, new business ideas. It's not about inventing Velcro or coming up with some brand new miraculous kind of wonderful technology. It's really just about giving yourself the platform and the opportunity, the idea, and then proving it. And once you've proved it, then you can grow it and scale it and grow it to something that can be huge.
So talk about TigerSpike, because people could Google TigerSpike, but
continuing the
yeah, but what?
So from that initial idea, we then I actually got a job in a big company that I was going to go and join, and I had a 2-week kind of gardening leave between finishing my work in government and joining this new company. And in that 2 weeks, all three of us were in a dedicated office in Surrey Hills, and we got more done and had more fun and just kind of set up more meetings and deals than we had in all the other time of having other stuff going on. So we didn't go back to. I didn't take that job and ended up staying in TigerSpike. It certainly, so it was, we had the company for 12 years. We bootstrapped it for the first 8, so we didn't raise any money until 2011. It was sort of 7 years, and then we raised some money from a strategic partner from a marketing agency called Aegis. So it was interesting. Growing the office initially, there were sort of 10 or 12 of us in various offices in Surrey Hills. When we got to sort of that 20, 25 people, that's when we started having kind of that where you get different layers and you have sort of senior people and junior people, and you lose a bit of touch with everything that's going on. I think that 25 to 50 people is a really interesting challenge. What we did was we ended up opening more offices. So we opened up an office in London in 2006, and we opened up an office in New York in 2008. And we had a founder go there and sort of run that office and then get that up to sort of the 25 people. So we never had the sort of 100 people in the same office challenge that some companies have. We sort of grew by expansion rather than anything else. One of the interesting things was when we raised money in 2011 was that the company who invested in us really did it as more of a PR exercise than anything else. They wanted to have a sort of a mobile component in their arsenal. So they didn't really get too involved in the company. They didn't sort of put a huge amount of oversight into what we were doing. And because we'd been so used to bootstrapping and not having a huge amount of money, we definitely made the sort of mistakes that any sort of VC would have pulled us up on fairly quickly, just because we could. We opened a very expensive office in San Francisco, and we were hiring engineers in 2011, same time as Google and Facebook and all these sort of much more well-funded startups were doing. And I think some people kind of worry about having a VC on board because they think they're going to, kind of make sure that you're not spending too much on pens or kind of not doing anything to waste the company's money. But I think it's as important that people kind of give you the right advice. And we just had no advice. So we just kind of got on with it and did things the way we thought we knew what we were doing. But I mean, it was interesting lessons. We should have picked different markets where we weren't competing with sort of much better funded companies than us. But still, we continue to grow. We opened up offices in Dubai and Tokyo, Singapore. I actually moved to run the Singapore office in 2012. And then 2015, we got to the point where we knew there was sort of an opportunity to perhaps exit the business. And just before that, we brought on a financial investor. And the thinking was that if we brought a financial investor on, they would have a sort of a 3-year horizon of when they wanted to get a return for their money. So they put some money in, and the plan was that we would use that as a means to getting to an exit for ourselves, because they would want to get their cash out at some point. And then fairly quickly after that, we were approached by a couple of different companies. So we ran a process with our investment banker firm out of the US, and we came very, very close to selling to Accenture. Unfortunately, in 2016, there was a bit of a blip in the stock market, and they ended up cutting 80% of the deals they were doing. They had 12 deals that were in the process, and ours was one of those. So we sort of had got very close. We'd done a lot of DD. They had 180 odd people in a data room looking at all of our bits and pieces. We only had about 250 people in the company at the time. And then at the last minute, that fell over, which was it was fairly devastating at the time, because we'd all kind of got quite enthusiastic about what the future was going to hold, and TigerSpike becoming a part of Accenture and us moving into roles in there. And it felt like a really good fit for the business. And suddenly that was all taken away, and then we were back to our own independence. And so but fortunately we'd got, we were hitting a lot of goals. We were hitting a lot of targets that we'd sort of set for the company and that kind of thing. And the advice was just to stick with it and continue to grow. We were still in a really interesting and hot space, that sort of digital transformation space, as mobile technology had become, and that more opportunities would present themselves. So, and then in 2017, we ended up selling the business to a company called Concentrix, which is part of the Synex group out of the US. They're a large sort of BPO type business, and they were very keen to add sort of the mobile capabilities to their offering. And it was a very quick process. So we first spoke to them in May. We had a term sheet in June, and then on the 31st of July, the deal was done, and we were all unemployed. So 4 of us, the 4 founders, were unemployed. So we actually left on day 1, which is quite interesting. Most people have earnouts and have to stick around for a few years. But we built the business to the point where it wasn't really about us anymore. It was about the technology and the processes and the people that we'd employed. And we said that they were very keen to integrate it into their business, and rather than have us along who were sort of ultimately going to just sort of leave, the feeling was it would be better if they brought their own people in to sort of keep that integration. So we kind of focused on making sure that there were warranties and indemnities in place, such that they were definitely getting what they were what they thought they were getting, and that all went very well. And so yeah, so as of 1st of August 2017, TigerSpike was no longer owned by us anymore, and that was that.
One thing I'm really interested in is that as an exited founder, has it been what you expected? And if it hasn't, what surprised you the most?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that we did that differs from a lot of founders is we took 30% of the money invested into the business at each stage off the table. So when we first raised money in 2011, 30% of the cash went to the hard-working, low-paid founders, which for me was about $1 million at the time. And then when we had the financial investment, again, we took 30% off the table. We're selling down our own equity, basically, rather than just issuing more shares and the cash going into the business. So, you know, it wasn't like we'd sort of just had a sort of salary, and then all of a sudden, we'd sold the business and had lots of cash. It was we'd taken stuff off, and we'd sort of got accustomed to what it was like to sell equity and to have a little bit more money along the way. And I think that's really interesting. And one of the things that we used to talk about was that the reason for that is to de-risk the business. If all of your wealth and everything you've got is tied up in your company, then it changes the way you make decisions. You become more conservative. You don't tend to kind of want to sort of do anything that might rock the boat. And also you kind of, founders always have a overinflated idea of what their business is worth. Whereas if you've managed to sort of sell a bit down and you've made a bit of cash along the way, you've got a much broader understanding of what it is to sell your equity, and the fact that you're not as invested. It's not like 100% of my wealth is tied up in TigerSpike. I've taken a bit off. So when I get, obviously it was a much larger chunk when we sold the business, but it didn't feel like it was just this huge sudden sort of lottery win. It was a little bit different. It felt like a sort of a culmination of a series of steps. In terms of what it is to be an exited founder, you don't realize it's a relatively small club. And I don't say that sort of flippantly. There's a lot of people who talk about what it's like to sell a business and to do it. And, success has many fathers, and failure is an orphan. But the people who actually have the equity and have sold the business and made that money, it's interesting. For some people, sort of the money and the financial reward is sort of a way of keeping score. If you got 5 mil, then you're not as good as someone who got 50 mil. And if you've got 100 mil, then you're way better than anybody else. From my perspective, it gave me the freedom pretty much to do whatever I wanted. And I think the thing that surprised me is that I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. And I've spoken to other people, and they're really bored. They don't have anything else. I'm quite fortunate because I'm quite passionate about golf, and I've thrown myself into golf, and I play quite a lot. The one thing that has surprised me recently is that you realize that when you have that opportunity to kind of to decide what it is you want to do, you know you have it takes a certain type of mentality to be able to kind of to live that way, to not be told that you have to be in the office at 9 o'clock, or you have to be on this Zoom call, you have to do it. It takes and exactly the same as we were at TigerSpike all the way along. You had to turn up, do stuff, go to meetings, make sales, win business, prove you were innovative and you kind of ahead of the curve, that sort of thing. And then when suddenly all that's removed, and you have to define yourself in a different way. It's not Oliver from TigerSpike, or it's not Oliver, head of innovation, or whatever it might be. It's just Oliver. And when you tell people you play golf, it's sometimes kind of hard to relate if people are worrying about their mortgage and if stuff's going wrong somewhere, and the most important thing you have is a 9:30 tee time. And that sort of, I think only in the last 12 months, so it'll be 5 years in July, I've started to want to do something more, and to be able to kind of take what I've learned and apply it in some sort of meaningful way. And that's kind of where I'm at now. That's what excites me the most about DQ, is because it's an opportunity to kind of use that knowledge and that kind of the journey that I've been on, and help other people who are thinking about starting that or doing it. And the interesting thing is that it's all I choose to do it. I have to sort of make sure that I'm the one trying to make contacts and kind of, speak to people about it, go to networking events and do stuff. And I think that COVID obviously has had a real impact on a huge number of things. And I think particularly in startups and that, because one of the most important things for us throughout the TigerSpike journey was the company culture. And everyone talks about this. It's just the most important part of any startup is how you can, build a team, get a culture that's kind of a high performing, but having fun and enjoying it, and getting the most out of people. Because you can't afford to do all the things that you can do in big business. You don't have big expense accounts. You can't fly business class. You don't put people up in big hotels, and you're paying at the bottom end of the salary scale most of the time in startups because you're trying to get that efficiency. And so you have to have other reasons for people to be there. So TigerSpike, we always paid for Friday lunch. So the reason for that was that we used to take our two interns to lunch at the Hard Rock Cafe, and that was the most exciting thing ever. And so we continued that in every office. So in every office all around the world. In New York, we were just above Chelsea Markets, so they'd go down and get a bunch of food and they put it all on the table. In Sydney, we had an amazing chap from Brazil who do a barbecue most Fridays. In Japan, in the Tokyo office, they would just have this enormous spread. In Singapore, we'd always go out to hawker centers, and the company paid for the Friday lunch. I know if you go to Google, they pay for every meal. There's a cafe, and it's all super cool. But we did those little things, and that's what creates a culture. We'd always have, I think it was Fitness Wednesday. I think it was Workout Wednesday or something. But we paid a fitness instructor, and whoever wanted on a Wednesday could come along, and then we'd have kind of personal training and circuits and stuff. And again, in each office, it's quite funny because they would post videos of doing it in the dark in Hyde Park in London in freezing cold in a sort of in January, and we were running on the beach here in Sydney in Bondi. Kind of the contrast between the two was great. And on Zoom and trying to do that when people are staring at a screen and writing code on a screen, and they might get paid 80 grand for one place and someone else offers them 85 and they just write code on that screen all day. I mean, there's just nothing to stop someone moving between jobs, and that's really difficult. And when you're working in technology and you've got a wide variety of, you've got sales and marketing people, you've got coders and developers, and you've got disparate people who all have different interests. Trying to create a culture now when you can't be in the same place and interact with people, I think is very difficult. And I think that's something that I think is probably, certainly from a DQ perspective, meeting companies and helping people start that journey when you're doing everything over video calls and people don't necessarily want to get together face to face, I think is a real challenge.
Hmm. And it's interesting. I haven't heard you talk about culture before, but do you think that is one of the characteristics of the business, or something that you guys did as founders that made you successful? Or do you think there was, because there's so many businesses that don't make that big exit or don't succeed at all. What do you think the key ingredients were for you guys?
I think probably the key. I think the culture was enormous. The culture was amazing. We were very lucky in that the early people who joined TigerSpike were phenomenal. There's a girl, Charlie Rowley, who's currently, I think she's still running the Sydney office. She's been with the company for such a long time. But the people we brought into the team created. I think also we were quite fortunate in the senior people that we hired. People that we hired who came in who had more skills in building business than we did. I think certainly founders have, if you've got more than one founder in a business, they've got different skills and different things that they bring to the company. One of the things that we recognized was that we didn't necessarily have the sort of large scale corporate growing and scaling a team skill that other people had. So the people we brought in to run the offices after we'd left were those kinds of people. Alex Burke, who became the CEO, Nick Newman in the London office, Alex Hall in New York. They were people who, once we were brilliant when there was sort of four or five of us, and then we'd get up to 15, and we'd hire those people, we'd get to 20, and then we'd sort of up and leave and go and do it again in a different country. And the people that we brought in to go from that sort of 20 to 50 to 80 office were more sort of corporate, more focused on what it took from an HR perspective to build a team, where they still kept the startup elements, but it wasn't about the crazy founder who's doing stuff that doesn't necessarily fit into the processes that you have to have when you've got a chain of command. And I think that's sort of getting out of people's way and putting people in place who have better skills than you do at growing a company is really important, because I don't think a founder can be this can run and attract attract employees to a 5 to 10 person company and inspire them, and also help in growing 100 or 200 or 300 person company. I think they tend to get in the way. And I think Luke and I were pretty good at recognizing the things we were good at and the things we weren't good at, and in getting out of the way and letting other people get on with stuff. I think that's something that helped. But I think you asked what the most important things were. Culture hugely important. Hiring, we're just very, very fortunate in the people that we hired to grow the company and build the team. And I think it was interesting. We spoke to one VC for a while just after we'd opened the New York office, which was our third office. And he said, "What are you doing?" "Why would you have opened up in New York?" He said, "You should just continue to grow in Australia and become a really big fish in the small pond that is the Australian digital market." I'll never forget it. He said, "At the moment, you're the smallest fish in this global market, and nobody wants to speak to the smallest fish. You're just going to get eaten. Everybody wants the big fish." And we didn't take his advice. And at one point, we'd sort of told people that we were, one of the smallest global companies in the world, because we had offices in 6 different countries, and it was challenging, and rightly or wrongly, it meant that each one sort of grew semi-independently, but we had similar processes. We were offering the same sort of products, and we were able to sort of cross-pollinate. We then worked quite hard on getting sort of global customers who worked with each of the offices, so that we sort of had that economies of scale that kind of some of the benefits that come with offices around the world. And we did some really interesting projects. We did a project with the UN on food vouchers for refugees, where we had 24 hours of engineering. So it was sort of a follow the sun. So it started in Sydney. They worked on the project for 8 hours. Then it got handed to Singapore, handed to London, handed to New York, handed to San Francisco, and then back to Sydney. And they finished the project off. So we delivered a product to them in sort of 24 hours of engineering, which was really cool. Like we just, that's when you think, my goodness, this is a sort of a global machine that's doing something. So there were some really, really cool highlights. Yeah, especially I think at the time we only must have had a couple, like maybe 200 employees. So, and that was sort of 8 offices. So it was spread pretty thin, but then each one felt like a startup. And that's what we were good at. That was what Luke and I were, that was our skill, was inspiring, small teams to punch above their weight and outperform others and deliver great work to customers. And then when it got to that sort of 25, 30 people, and you had to kind of get an approval for this, and then you had to fill in a form for that was when we would start to get frustrated. And we would, because we, as the founders, we could break things. I think getting out of the way and letting those processes come into place meant that we could service larger customers. Because when you're working with the Qantases and some of the bigger companies in the world, you have to have the right processes in place to be able to sort of meet their requirements, or things just break.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of takeaways there, but for me, the ones I got were focus on culture from day one, which I think is not an obvious thing to do. I think a lot of people build the company, forget culture, we'll hire people, we'll get the culture later when we can afford HR. But by then, I guess it's too late. Yeah, so number 2, what Richard Branson always says is hire better people than you, especially at the things that you're not good at. And 3, know your strengths, which is a key part of number 2 as well, and play to your own strengths. And I was going to ask you what your strengths are, but you kind of answered that building something going from 0 to 1.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And I think also it's that recognizing. I mean, for me, when I first arrived in Australia, as I said, I was the 6th employee in a company called Global Gossip, which was a chain of internet cafes run by Peter and Philip. And the really interesting thing for me, seeing how they worked and how they built their company, was that I realized they were just nothing special. I mean, they're great guys and I love them to pieces. They've done amazing things, but it wasn't like they were these sort of Bill Gates or Steve Wozniak, but sort of kind of type people who were on a pedestal and complete geniuses that you could never possibly be anything like. They were just perfectly normal people who had an idea and did it. And that's the learning that I certainly took in the early days of TigerSpike. I said, why not? Just, anybody can do this. And it was, understanding that, you can do things and you can get on with it, was quite a big deal. That it's not beyond the realms of possibility that anyone can start a company and can grow it and get to a point where it's successful.
I was actually talking to Anup, one of the guys that we're working with, and we're talking about something which has the potential to get very big, and he asked me that's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to do. How are we going to manage this? And I think I'm a bit like you. I definitely I don't see myself running a big business. I like the small stuff and getting started. And I just said to him, don't worry about all that stuff. Don't forget that, because that's never going to happen unless we do the next thing. Just think about the next thing. Let's do the next thing and do it really well. And then again, and then again, and again. And eventually, suddenly you've achieved all these things. You look back, you think, wow, how did we do that?
Whoa. Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. I remember a lot of people talk about, and often people who haven't necessarily sold businesses but think they know what they're talking about, will say that you should know what your exit sort of strategy is. Who are you going to sell this to? What's your plan? Are you going to IPO? And I think it's great to have an idea of what that might be, whether it's a trade sale to Google or whatever the possibilities are. But I think you can't sort of work towards that. There has to be something that just happens as a result of one step, then the next step, then the next step, rather than thinking, if I do this, then I'll get that exit. I don't think that sort of mentality works. And I think, yeah, otherwise it just becomes, if you think I've got to get to a 400-person business and it's just me sitting at a computer today, it seems completely ridiculous. I just wouldn't even know where to start. Whereas you find somebody who's really good at coding and you have a chat with them and you go out for lunch and it's awesome and they do something really cool, and then suddenly you need somebody who's good at design and you put an advert out and you get some kid straight out of university who's just brilliant and really enjoys it and has a great time, and then you need someone to answer the phone and you hire this amazing girl who was the first girl we employed, and there were 10 guys in a smelly office, and the first thing she did was said, you have to open a window in here, this is ridiculous. And Rose was just incredible. She went on to be a senior account manager. Everybody we've initially hired who's come in and done something has moved on through the business. I think one of the things as well, you talk about culture being so important. I think also we often hired people not necessarily for specific jobs. I mean, obviously you've got a job description and you want them to do that, but as soon as people express an interest in doing something else and helping them grow, the beauty of a startup is that people often have to wear multiple hats. And when you find, one of our best project managers started out as a developer, and he wasn't a brilliant coder. He was sort of pretty good and he got stuff done. But it became a fantastic project manager because his background was in code, so he really understood the tech. But he was a real sort of friendly sort of people person. He was able to talk to customers and then relay exactly what was required to the techies. And he had those sort of skills. And I think if he'd stayed a coder, he'd always have been a fairly mediocre coder. But being able to grow into that project management role was amazing. And Charlie, who again, she started working on reception, and then she did an accountancy degree, and now she was the general manager of the city business. So she kind of went all the way through. Just the last point on the culture is that culture isn't something. It's something that's created as part of the journey, and then it takes a lot to kind of keep it going. It's something you can't plan, you can't decide, I'm going to have this sort of culture in my business. You've just got to kind of make sure that people are kind of wanting a bit of meaning from what they're doing. When you're in a startup, it's not like I do it just for my paycheck. You do it because it becomes more of a cause. There's a whole bunch of stuff around creating a cause rather than a business. And we tried to do that a lot at TigerSpike. We were always talking about how, the reason behind doing this stuff is to make people, enable them to do their jobs quicker, to enable sort of work to become more meaningful, because the functionality was something you could do on a device. You could do it quicker on your phone, quicker on your iPad, which means you could finish by 4 o'clock and you could get to your kids' soccer practice, rather than an inefficient process that was kind of crap, that meant you were still in the office at 6 and you got home when it was dark at 6:30 and it was crap. So we tried to sort of bring it down to that level of trying to kind of make it meaningful for people. And the work that you're doing, even though you're writing code for an app, you're doing it because the person who's going to use it is going to benefit from it and make their lives a little bit better in everything that you do. And that kind of cause, I think, is really, really important in any startup. As long as you're, especially today with sort of whether it's impact or climate or whatever it is, having something that kind of adds meaningful value to people's lives will create the culture and the meaning behind your startup, and empower you to really sort of put the business on the right track from the very start.
Now you had TigerSpike for many years and built that into a successful business and saw certain people excel. And then you're an investor in startups, and I will come on to Investable in a minute. And obviously through DQventures, now we're investing in founders, and we're seeing certain people become successful. Is there what if anything is the common trait that you've seen, or a common trait that you've seen in people that go on to be successful, or for example, when you meet someone you think that person's going to be successful? Is it ambition, confidence, intellect, drive, courage? I'm sure it's a combination of all those things, but is there one thing that to you really stands out?
It's interesting. I mean, I don't think there's any one thing. I think it's the sort of thing that you definitely you don't know you can be a entrepreneur, a business leader, a founder, whatever it is, until you do it, and you don't know what skills you have. I think people I find who have a high degree of self-awareness, they understand a bit about themselves. They know they're good at some things. They know they're not very good at things. People who sort of don't necessarily walk into a meeting with a presentation and think they've got all the answers and know it all. They've got a good idea and they're confident and they're ambitious, but they also understand that there's probably some gaps, there's some deficiencies along the way that they're looking to fill. And I think that's something I think that often resonates with VCs as well. I mean, there's some people who go in, they've got a brilliant idea, they're an incredible entrepreneur, and VCs fall over themselves to invest. I haven't met too many of them, but I'm sure they're out there. I find often it's those people who have a good idea, have started something and started to build something, but know that with a bit of help and with some capital invested and with the right kind of hires and some advice and some sort of continued sort of growth, they've got that EQ, that understanding of how to work with people and to understand about themselves what it is they need to continue to grow their business. And I think also it's people who don't always sort of listen to all the advice. You get so much advice. There's so many people telling you how to do this and whether you should use a safe note or go to a VC or don't raise any money. And we found that often the advice you get from people is always very much through the lens of their own experience. If they've raised money before or they've seen companies be successful using VC, then you have to raise VC and that's the only way to go. And I think now you've just got to make a call. Listen to all the advice. Listen to the people who've done things before you and try and avoid the potholes that perhaps they hit. But just make a decision and go for it and do it yourself. And then have that. It's the people who have that ability to say, well, I'm not really sure, whether I should do this or whether I should go here, and that's the kind of thing where you think that's the kind of person I want to invest in or I want to help. I want to give them the advice because they might outgrow my advice in a couple of years' time, and hopefully they'll still be in the position where they'll ask the next person, how do I get to 1,000 people? How do I open an office in South America? Like there is always new things to be learning and new people to be kind of assisting with on the journey. And if I look back over TigerSpike, I mean, the advice we had in the start and the people we spoke to were very different to when we had offices around the world, and were completely different to the people we spoke to and the people we got advice from for how to exit the business. And then suddenly you find you're the person who's been on the journey and you're trying to give that advice back to people. And I try very hard not to just give people the sort of tell them what to do based on what I did. I try and say, hey, here's what
Do
worked
what
for
I
us.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Here's what worked for us, and this is why I think it worked for us. But in your situation with what you're trying to do, this is perhaps how you might want to approach it. Have a think about that, and then go and talk to other people. And if you get the same advice from two or three people, that's probably what you should do. But yeah, so I think what I look for is that kind of um, conviction in what they're doing, as well as self-awareness and understanding in their own sort of frailties and their own deficiencies, and an ability to kind of fill those by using the team and the people around them, whether that, and that's what creates the culture. That kind of, people don't want to work for some arrogant know-it-all who thinks he's got all the answers. They want to be a part of a team where everybody's pulling in the same direction and everybody's doing their best to create something incredible, or be as high performing as they possibly can be.
Okay, so you mentioned Investable. What people won't know Investable probably. Tell us about that and what you're doing there.
Yeah, so Investable is an early stage VC, a venture capital company. They invest between 500 and 1.5 mil in startups. They were founded in Australia by Creel and Trevor, and now have offices in Singapore. So when they first opened up in Singapore, I'd been out of TigerSpike for about a year, and I met Creel and Annie and had a good chat. And sort of the typical exited founder, well-worn path is to become a VC and start putting your money back into other startups. And I thought, well, that might be something that could be interesting. So I was their entrepreneur in residence, based in Singapore for about 12 months. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Investable has a really a great way of looking at startups, and helping startups understand where they are on the startup journey. Um, and it has its fairly, I think Creel talks about how it's sort of 50% science and 50% art is startup investing. It's how much of it's, have you met these metrics and you've ticked these and you've got these KPIs and you're doing this, and then how much is it gut feel about the founders and this business, and is it going to make it, and is it going to get to sort of the unicorn status that everybody's hoping for. But the challenge I found is that it's very much a numbers game. I met about 160 companies. I think they invested in two of them over the time I was with them. And there's so many companies where they just need either a couple more customers perhaps, or their technology just needed to have evolved a little bit. They needed to just sort of be in a slightly different market. But the VC game is really about finding the ones that kind of tick those boxes, and then saying yes. But often it's sort of no 99.9% of the time, because a lot of businesses fail. And I just found that from my perspective, I wanted to kind of spend some time working with some of these companies, helping them get to the point where they might be ready for investment, or helping them get enough customers that they didn't need investment. They could just kind of grow organically, and that might be the best answer for them, rather than spending months and months trying to raise money and then running out of cash and the business dying. And that didn't sort of fit with the typical VC model. So that was when I bumped into you guys, and you'd been kicking around this idea of helping people start companies, and really sort of working closely with founders who were sort of more mature, that sort of 35 to 40 plus, had day jobs, so were kind of working well into their careers, and didn't necessarily have the capacity to sort of go all in on a startup immediately and take that risk. And for me, that really resonated, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into getting a business up and running, which can really be done by anyone. I think it's there's an idea, and there's the founder has to sort of jump ship and come on board at some point. I think that's the key. It's not going to work if they've always got another job. Otherwise, it's just a sort of lifestyle hobby business. But I think there's lots of things. It's about creating a platform and a sort of a vehicle into which a brilliant founder, someone who really understands what they're doing, can step into, and sort of de-risking that process for them, so that all the elements are in place for them to run a business that's up and running when they do happen to leave their job. And that's what I love about it, because that process of getting things up and running, getting it started, testing a hypothesis, getting a business model up and running, and then getting to that sort of ready to raise money, or raising money, and then getting those 3, 4, 5 initial employees into the business, getting those first customers on board, and then letting it go and stepping away, because I know that's where my sort of operational expertise kind of ends. That's what's super exciting for me.
I do think that because there's so much press about venture capital and people who've closed big deals, I think that for first time founders there's a danger of thinking it's easy and thinking that's just the way to do it. I've got a great idea. These VCs are investing in all these things. They're going to invest in me. But the fact is that VCs don't invest. They basically don't invest in anyone. I was listening to the founder of Blackbird, the Australian VC, saying that they talk to 2,000 between 2 and 10,000 founders a year to invest in 20. And a lot of people don't know about the power law, but the power law is that a VC is expecting that one or two of their portfolio companies are going to pay off the whole fund, and the rest may be okay or fail. And so if you don't have an idea that's big enough to pay off the entire fund, so in other words, if you don't have an idea that can be a unicorn plus, then they're never going to invest in you. Full stop. So and nearly all founders who come up with an idea don't have an idea that big. So basically VCs are no good for them. And I think that's why I love DQ, is that we're supporting those founders who maybe aren't going to build a unicorn, but if they could sell their business for 10, 20, 30 million, it's life changing, and it's going to be incredible for them. And it's going to be good for us because we're co-founders, and it's going to be good for their other investors who are maybe angel investors or people who are putting a bit of cash into something that's not the stock market. But this idea that it's got to be VC is a misnomer.
Yeah. I remember we met with a guy in the States, and so we were trying to raise 20 mil in 2011, and he had a $4 billion fund. And so 20 mil was sort of the rounding error in the bottom of his spreadsheet somewhere over there. And he's like, even if you guys, for me to put money into 20 mil into you, and your valuation, I mean, our valuation at the time was sort of, I mean, that would have, we weren't worth 60 mil. So, he was like, you would have to, you'd have to grow by so much for that money to make any difference to the size of my fund. And you're just not going to. He said, even if you go five, 8, 10 times, which is enormously successful, and I wish you all the best, and that's great. You make zero difference. You don't move the needle, as they say. And so it's also about picking the size of the fund. I mean, if you want to raise $1 million and someone's got $1 billion to play with, you're such a small percentage of their fund that it doesn't really work. Whereas if somebody's got $2 million and you're trying to raise sort of 500,000, if you were to 5 times the money, then you've doubled the size of their fund. So that's the sort of thing you've got to get. It's that fit between what the person with the money has and what you're trying to do. But yeah, that power word is good. I've heard that a couple of times. I was speaking. That's what Cheryl was talking about. She was saying that Angel Networks is not about that. They're about investing in businesses that they feel there's going to be a return from, but it might be a 2, 3, 4 times return rather than a 10, 15, 20 times return, and trying not to, I mean, the flip side to that is that if you're going to be the one that makes all of the money back and the 100 times, you get all of the attention. But very quickly, you're in this kind of dead area where you're not the one that the VC knows is going to make the money. So you just get ignored, and then you don't get any of the support. You don't get anything else that goes with it. So yeah, it's a fascinating game. And I think the other thing is that the reality is often quite different to what you read in the papers. Just like you said, it is so easy. There's so much money around. Everybody's raising money. Just show me a PowerPoint and I'll give you the cash. I think that's something that, I mean, we like to say that when the advantage that we try to do is try and get as much done as you can. Build a product, sell it to a customer, do something that, just explain how it's going to work. Don't go and waste money on registering 47 URLs for your business or drawing up all sorts of things that you don't need. Just actually try and do stuff. Like for us, it was make those ringtones and then turn them from one format into another. For somebody else, it's build a website that just ask some questions and get some feedback and get some real live kind of customers on board who are willing to pay for what it is that you're coming up with. And I think once you've proved that, then you can sort of tackle the problem of, well, how do I automate this? How do I build my product? How do I get it out into market? How do I scale it?
Yeah, nice. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'm going to let you go because it's probably dinner time where you are. What's next? What's your next goal? It doesn't need to be work. It doesn't need to be anything to do with business. What is the one thing that you're focused on now that you're going to achieve?
Yeah.
In the near future. In the near future. Yeah, it could be, it could be that you're going to run a marathon or climb a mountain.
No,
No, no, I know you
none
better
of the
than
above.
that.
No, definitely. It's an interesting question. I haven't really put too much thought into that. I think one of the things, one thing you talk about, and we'll come back to a more specific answer that we can maybe use. But one of the things that's interesting is, what it's about. What does sort of success look like? What do people think of as success? Is it $10 million? Is it $100 million? Is it, being able to buy my mum a house? What are those things that you really look for? And I think one of the things that I've I'm quite fortunate or quite fortunate about myself and my situation is that now that we've sort of exited the business and we're in a position where we don't necessarily need to work or get a paycheck again. It's kind of then how do you choose to spend your time? So for me, it's about the one thing I've always said is success for me is how many other people I make successful. So how can I help somebody else achieve their definition of success? So if their definition of success is $5 million or $10 million or buying a house or making enough money from their own business to pay off their mortgage, whatever it might be, if I can do that for people, then that's me achieving success. It's no longer about what I can do and need because I'm sort of in a position where I don't need to worry about that. But I do get a real kick out of enabling other people's success, and I've always said that. So a kind of a specific goal would be you know to get from 0 to 1 for 10 companies. So people who had an idea but still had a job and just wanted to get their business. For me, from a work perspective, that would be success. I think from I guess in a non-work perspective, I don't really have. There's nothing really that I'm targeting at the moment. I've got my handicap down to single figures. I'm focusing on that.
Oh, I was going to say golf, surely.
Yeah. Uh,
Missing fewer putts.
exactly. But yeah, generally, I think I love the idea of. I genuinely love the idea of making other people successful. I think that's great. And I mean, a simple one was my wife recently sold her business. Her exit was hugely successful. That was definitely in that sort of 10 to 50 kind of range, rather than the sort of the $100 million exit. But it was perfect for the nature of her business and what she was doing.
Yeah, just drop that in there. It was substantially lower than my exit.
Yeah, make sure that makes the video.
Yeah, exactly.
But relative to the time spent, it was way better. So if you divide the length of time she worked on the company by the amount she made, then she's way ahead. So it's
Well,
kind
we'll
of
edit that bit out.
it's all yeah. And as long as you keep in TigerSpike was her idea, she'll be fine. Yeah, cool. I mean, I think that
Didn't she name it as well?
it's her. Yeah, it's her name. Her name. Her. She was the managing directoress. She owned 50% of the shares with ASIC until we had a massive 8-hour meeting in a pub in Sydney, where we sorted out the equity between myself, Dean, Luke, and Alex. And we just, by the end of it, Luke was taking notes, and everything was agreed. And at the end of it, he was just dribbling. We were completely smashed. But that one document, which said who had what, and when we got rid of all of Anna's equity, was quite momentous in the TigerSpike history. Yeah, and honestly, before and this don't need to do the recording, but I don't have any massive goal. Like I don't want to climb Everest or do anything. I'm quite comfortable just trying, like living in the present.
Content.
Yeah, and it's living in the present. It's like focusing on where the kids are going to go to school. And I was talking to someone the other day, 3.5 years, Charlie will be applying for universities, which is a terrifying thought. And then Scarlett's going to be doing that. It's really about just like the next thing, that one thing that's in front of you. I don't need, not trying to think about where I'll be when I'm 50 or what's happening in the next 10 years. I don't know if that's a good way to be or a bad way to be, but that's certainly where I'm at the moment.
People in the startup world, and I've definitely been guilty of this at times, are are so focused on that exit, that destination, that I think they're often in danger of not enjoying the journey. And one thing that listening to you speak has shown me is that nothing really changes. Your bank balance changes. The house that you live in changes. You maybe own it instead of rent it, but actually everything else is the same. And so why should you not be enjoying every single moment now? okay, you're doing a different job maybe, but yeah, but it's I think a lot of people probably need that self realization that this is it. This is it. This basically is my lot.
Yeah, this is good. I think the one thing, I think probably the thing that is most satisfying is not the word, but the one thing is that you talk about in marriages and in relationships where often finance and money is a massive deal, and whether what you're earning and whether mortgage and who earns the money and where are we going to go and how are we going to pay for this and projecting into the future, and if your job isn't good enough, then you're not good enough, that sort of thing. And I think having made money where that no longer becomes an issue has made a massive difference to my relationship, to my marriage, because I think, and not because she still thinks I'm a twat and whatever, but just money is just not something that we ever think about. And it's not like we don't go out and I haven't got Maseratis and buy fast cars and boats and that sort of stuff. It's not the thing, because that's not really what either of us worry about. But you just don't have to, you don't think about money in the same way. And this is really hard. This is something that you can only talk about with other people who in that situation, because everybody thinks about money and it's such a big deal in so many relationships, and it's such a thing that causes so many issues and problems. When you remove that, then it makes it's just such a it's like the whole thing just comes off your shoulders. You don't think about it at all. And it's weird because it's not as if we had massive problems before. Like we were never in a really horrible situation and things were never really bad. But it was one of those things that you'd argue about. Things would, who was, how, when you couldn't afford things and you were worried about kids' education, all this stuff, it all becomes a big deal. And when finance as an issue is removed from your relationship, it's incredible. And it's so interesting, is coming back to Australia and hanging out with friends who they're still working in, good jobs and getting paid well and that sort of stuff, but they still have that issue with how am I going to pay off the mortgage, and will I have enough to retire, and what am I going to do when I'm 60? And that's just something that it's not even part of our vernacular anymore. So that's something that it's difficult because you can't talk to too many people about that. I have to say, it's not a conversation that many people can relate to, because that is still very much a part of their, you only need 2 or 3 of your 60 startup investments to pay off, James, and you'll be flying around the world in that private jet. But that's not about flying about the world in a private jet. It's about not having to worry about money conversations with your wife. That's I don't know how to relate. I don't know how to, you know what I mean? Like,
I think you related that really well, and no, I'm not in that position myself, but I don't think you're, like you said, I don't think you're a twat for talking about it. I think you've made that leap, and I'm glad you're talking about it. It makes it interesting, and it's very easy to relate to. And I think that you went to university with one of my mates. You're the same age as me. You're someone I can relate to who's gone from being in my position to being in that position. And I know a fair few people who've made that transition by putting their money where their mouth is and starting something that they believe in and growing it. And the truth is, it's probably safer to be in a job and invest the money that you make in something else. But if you do want that life-changing wealth, then starting your own company is probably the only way to do it, other than winning a lottery. Just before you interrupt, my twin brother works for Princess Yachts, delivering these not super yachts, but they're pretty super to the likes of me. And he said that nearly all of their customers have their own company. There might be Formula One drivers or pop stars, but there's no one who works for IBM who buys one of those yachts. They all own their own company, and that's how to make meaningful wealth. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I think I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a path for normal people to go from kind of being in a position where there's an uncertainty, and yes, it might be safe, and you're going to get paid 100 200 grand a year, whatever, and that might go on forever. But I think if you are able to take just a small step into becoming a business owner and giving that a shot, and do it in such a way that doesn't kind of turn your life completely upside down, then that's probably the best chance you have of getting to a point where you're in a much more comfortable position. And I think it's also like, I think the other point as well is that the journey is really fun. Like it's a great way to spend your time and be a part of something amazing rather than kind of something where you're kind of less in control of your own destiny. I think that's the beauty of it. That journey is super fun. And lots of people who found businesses stay with them forever. They never end up, even if they sell them, they stay running that company and doing all sorts of things. So I think you're absolutely right. It's a way for sort of normal people to kind of achieve amazing things. So yeah, it could be right for anyone, I'd say.
Yeah, but I would just say that it sounds like we're talking all about money now. But I would say that if you want to make money in startups, don't do your own one. That's ridiculous because you're putting all your money on one bet. You're putting everything on that one thing. And I've had a startup that didn't work out, and it's painful in every possible way. Reputation, finance, friendships become harder, and it takes a bit of repairing, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. If you want to make money from a startup, invest in startups, but you probably don't know anything about startups, so you're probably going to get that wrong. So I would say pick a fund that invests in early stage companies and invest in them. And I've done that, and on paper that's looking like the best financial decision I ever made. But do a startup for you, for like the other reasons that you said, that freedom, excitement, fun, building something, satisfaction, being your own boss. There's so many reasons to do it that don't relate to money. And then if you do make that big exit and you get to a position where you never need to talk about money with your wife again, then that's just the cherry on top.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic summary. Just keep that in. That's all you need. That that's brilliant. I think that's spot on. And I think, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't change any of it in terms of the process. I mean, there's some, probably a subject for another time, but kind of the things that do go wrong along the way are heartbreaking and soul destroying, and stuff happens. And it's not an easy journey. It's definitely not something that, like you said, the impression is you just kind of rock up with a PowerPoint, raise some money, grow your business, hire some people, and then sell it. It's not like that at all. It is super fun. It is kind of everything contained in the journey, from the highest of highs down to kind of the lowest of lows, and it's great fun, really, and really something that I couldn't recommend highly enough.